Today I'm going to show you a little bit about performing air sealing in site-built homes. I'm going to talk about both methods and materials, and I'm going to go out in the field and show you some scenarios where we actually do the work of air sealing. We'll be looking at places where we'll be sealing up building cavities, things like stud bays and floor joists. We'll be sealing around doors and windows. We'll actually seal a couple of recessed light fixtures, and we'll also seal places where pipes and wires penetrate the shell of the building. We use a handful of materials, and I got some of them right here with me. One of my favorite materials for air sealing actually is a piece of this foam board. It's extruded polystyrene. I'm using a piece of 1 inch here, but you could use 2 inches. This is a really nice material because it's easy to cut and fit into openings. Lots of times we'll put it into place. We may nail or screw it into place, but it's almost always sealed into place with foam or caulking. This also has an advantage that it does add about an inch worth of insulation, which in some situations, but not all, can be helpful. I've also got a piece of sheetrock here. Lots of times to fill a bigger gap, we may cut a piece of drywall in order to seal a large opening. Again, we then usually seal around the edges of that drywall with caulking or with some type of foam. I've got a couple different kinds of one-part foam here. This is actually one of my favorite materials to work with. This is one-part foam. It comes squirting out of the can, and in this case we actually have a replaceable gun that's used as opposed to the disposable type. This comes squirting out of the can, sets up in 1 to 3 minutes or something like that. This material is used as opposed to the two-part foam, which is sprayed onto a surface. I've got a couple different kinds of foam here. This is the low expansion type foam. If you're sealing around doors and windows, you don't want to use high expansion foam because it'll swell up so quickly and with so much strength, it can warp the jambs so your doors and windows don't operate properly. So be sure to use the low expansion foam around doors and windows. I've also got standard caulking here. For most air sealing work, you don't need a real expensive caulk. We'll tend to use a lot of acrylic latex or siliconized acrylic for that type of work and a standard caulking gun. This may be a pretty primitive piece of technology, but it's still a real common and useful tool for us for air sealing work. I've also got some backer rod here. Lots of times if you have big, deep openings you want to fill, you can insert backer rod into the opening so it doesn't suck up so much foam or caulking. The backer gives a place for the foam or caulking to stop to so you can make a nice light bead at the front of the opening. I've also got some sheet metal here. Lots of times we use sheet metal to plug openings where there's heat-producing devices, things like chimneys that you need to seal around to slow air movement, but where you don't want to create a fire hazard. So we'll often use sheet metal, cut that to fit around that heat-producing device or around that chimney, and then seal it with high-temperature silicone caulking. Okay, we have a lot to see. Let's get started.
Here's one way to seal recessed light fixtures. When recessed light fixtures are installed in the ceiling below an attic, they usually create a major gap in the thermal boundary. A lot of air leaks through these fixtures, even those that the manufacturer says are airtight. Plus, that fixture protrudes up into the insulation, creating a thin place in the insulation. You can seal these cans by several different methods, but the one shown here both creates an air seal and adds some insulation. Here you can see how to build a foam box that'll be installed over the fixtures. You simply cut 5 pieces of extruded polystyrene foam board, being sure to make the box large enough to allow at least 3 inches of clearance from all 4 sides and to the top of the box. Nail or screw the box together and seal the edges with one-part foam. You can also seal the box with caulking. Here we see a recessed light fixture installed in a sheetrock ceiling. Move any existing insulation away with a rake or your hand. Measure up the situation since you'll almost always need to cut the box in order to fit it over the fixture. Center the box over the fixture and secure it to a joist with nails or screws. Then seal it to the top of the ceiling using one-part foam or caulking. Replace the insulation as evenly as possible around and over the box. Seal the tops of balloon wall stud bays to keep heated air from escaping or cool air from descending into the house from the attic. There are several ways to seal these large leaks. Here you can see how to use rigid foam board and one-part foam. First you measure up the cavity and then cut the rigid foam board to the approximate size of the stud cavity. If you're going to use foam to seal it into place, cut it a little small to leave room for the foam. You can use a disposable can of 1 part foam, but we're using a reusable gun. Simply screw the gun onto the top of a canister of foam. Adjust the pin valve to the size of the foam bead you need. Drop the foam into the cavity. If the board fits loosely, it may be easier to thread a drywall screw into the center of the board as a handle, or just pierce it with a stick as a handle. Spray along the edges of the board with single-part foam to seal it. Hold the board in place until the foam begins to set. When you are done with the foam gun, unscrew the foam canister and allow the gun to vent any leftover foam by pulling the trigger. Unscrew the canister over a piece of scrap. Both the gun and the can will vent a large amount of foam. Clean the gun out by screwing on a canister of gun cleaner and pulling the trigger until the spray is clear. This cleaner is a powerful solvent and it's extremely flammable, so use it in a well-ventilated area or outside. Drop ceilings can hide some major penetrations. Plumbers, electricians, and audiovisual techs may hammer holes to run utilities through drywall or plaster and not patch them up afterwards. To seal these penetrations, measure the hole and note where the wire or pipe enters the hole. Cut a piece of scrap drywall to slightly larger than the hole and cut out a section for the pipe or wire. Attach the patch over the hole with a couple of drywall screws and then caulk or foam the edges and around the pipe or wire. Subfloors may have very similar penetrations. Look for large penetrations like this one above the crawl space. Seal them with a piece of drywall or OSB. Fasten it into place with screws. And caulk or foam the edges. Chimney chases that pass into attics can allow a lot of conditioned air to leak out of the home. Use aluminum or steel flashing and high-temperature silicone for sealing around this heat-producing device. First, clear any insulation away from the chimney using a rake or your hands. Then cut 2 D-shaped pieces of aluminum flashing that fit the shape of half the chimney. The 2 pieces should overlap at the seam when they're installed around the chimney. Seal the flashing around the chimney and to the ceiling using the high-temperature silicone. Be sure to build a dam around the chimney before sweeping the insulation back into place. In the living space of the home, windows may leak where the window meets the framing of the home. You have 3 options for sealing around windows. The first is simply caulking around the window. If the gap is particularly small and not very deep, a bead of an inexpensive acrylic caulk can seal this leak quickly and effectively. For windows with very deep or slightly wider gaps, you can use foam backer rod so it doesn't take so much caulking or foam to fill the gap. Backer rod comes in various widths. Pick the best size, tear off a piece, and force it into the crack. Then fill the gap with caulk or foam to create an airtight seal. Be sure to use low expansion foam around doors and windows. Don't use the standard foam, since its rapid and aggressive expansion can warp the window or door so that it doesn't operate properly. This is the voice of experience. Use the low expansion foam to seal around doors and windows without bowing the jamb. You can seal rim joists in crawl spaces and basements by several methods. We prefer using 2-part foam because it's both a durable air seal and has a high R value per inch. You first clean out each bay so that the foam will stick well. Spray a heavy layer of foam in each bay, enough to result in about 1 to 3 inches of cured foam. Be sure that the foam forms a continuous surface from floor joist to floor joist and from floor deck to sill plate.
So now we've seen a variety of ways you can perform air sealing in homes. And we use a lot of different materials. We use sheetrock and caulk to fill a few holes. And we use foam board and 1-part foam to fill some bigger openings and to make an enclosure over a recessed light fixture. We use some 1-part foam with some holes around pipes and wires. And we also use sheet metal and high temperature caulk to seal around a B-vent chimney. So there's a lot of materials you have in your tool bag, and it'll be up to you to learn when to use each method and material depending on the air sealing task that you're facing.